A man went to bed one night and never woke up. At first, investigators said it was an overdose. Tragic. Accidental. Case closed. But there was one problem. His wife had already been buying fentanyl, weeks before he died. And that is not where the disturbing details end. That is where they begin. We will come back to that purchase, specifically when it happened, how much she paid, and what she said when she asked for it. Because when you see those details in sequence, the word accidental becomes very difficult to hold on to. For now, let's establish who these people were. Because this case is not just about what happened in a bedroom. In the early hours of March 4th, 2022, it is about everything that was already in motion before that night arrived. Eric Richins grew up in Summit County, Utah, the eldest child of a well-established local family. The Richins name carried weight in that community. There were buildings bearing it, a cattle ranch that eventually became a conservation property, a legacy of involvement and visibility that made the family known and respected across the region. He served a 2-year mission in Mexico City. He learned fluent Spanish. He came back, earned a degree in international studies from the University of Utah, and eventually started his own masonry company with his close friend and business partner, Kouri Richins. They called it C&E Masonry. Eric's share of that company, at its peak valuation, was worth roughly $2.5 million. He had been married once before, in his early 20s. The divorce was hard emotionally and financially. He spent years single after that. Then he walked into a Home Depot and noticed the woman working the register. Her name was Kouri Richins. She was known locally as one of the most attractive women in the area, sharp, ambitious, and by all accounts, genuinely warm. Eric was smitten almost immediately. One of the regular cashiers reportedly teased him to just go and ask her out already. When he finally did, and she said yes, people who knew them said they became inseparable almost overnight. Kouri had built herself with real intention. She'd worked in housekeeping, healthcare, and design. She had earned a bachelor's degree in healthcare administration and a master's degree in human resources. She would go on to launch her own real estate business, closing on several high-value properties. By every visible measure, she was not someone who needed to be rescued. She was building something alongside him. They were married in 2013. And here's the first detail in this case that is worth slowing down for. On the morning of the wedding, before the ceremony began, Eric's mother, Linda, presented Kouri with a prenuptial agreement. The motivation, according to Linda, was straightforward protection. Eric had suffered financially through his first divorce. She did not want that happening again. The document was simple in structure. If they divorced, neither party would have access to the other's assets or income. Eric's share of C&E Masonry was included. His business, his properties, his financial future, none of it would transfer to Kouri in the event of a split. However, there was one critical exception. If one of them died before the other, the surviving spouse would inherit everything. Divorce meant nothing. Death meant everything. Read that again, because it becomes the axis around which this entire case eventually turns. That clause, written into a document presented on a wedding morning, meant that the only path through which Kouri could legally access Eric's $2.5 million estate was through his death. Not his failure, not his departure, his death specifically. We will come back to that. For the first several years, the marriage appeared to function well from the outside. Multiple properties, a growing real estate business, 3 sons. Eric remained a visible, involved presence in his children's lives. People who knew him described him not just as a provider, but as someone who showed up at games, at dinners, in the daily details. He coached his sons' sports teams. He checked in on the people around him. But then, somewhere around 2020, something began to shift in how Eric perceived his wife. In 2020, the couple took a romantic trip to Greece. One evening during the trip, Eric called his sister Amy. He told her that Kouri had fixed him a drink. After finishing it, he became violently ill. And then he said something that does not typically come from a bad cocktail on vacation. He said he thought Kouri was trying to poison him. Now, Kouri's brother has a different account. He says Eric was on medication that prohibited alcohol. He ordered a non-alcoholic drink. The server brought him one with alcohol in it, and he got sick. Kouri called the doctor, handled the situation, and by later that evening, Eric was fine. If you are sitting with both of those accounts, ask yourself this: which one explains why a man's first phone call from a Greek vacation is to his sister to say his wife just tried to poison him? People do not arrive at that conclusion from a single bad drink. That conclusion comes from a context, from something already building underneath the surface of what looked from the outside like a perfect life. But here's what matters most about what happened in Greece. Nothing changed after. They came home, they went back to their lives. Eric did not confront her, did not file for divorce, did not go to police. He stayed. And the accumulation continued. In November of 2020, 14 months before Eric's death, he did something without telling Kouri. He drew up a new living trust. He transferred the family home, his personal property, and his share of the masonry business into it. He named his sister Katie as the person who would control those assets if he died. He did not explain this to Kouri. He did not tell her it was happening. He simply restructured his estate so that if he died, she could not touch it. Then he went back to living with her. He kept coaching the sports teams. He kept building the company. He kept showing up for the kids. Think about that decision. This is not the behavior of someone in panic. This is not impulsive. A person who quietly rewrites their estate documents, names a family member as executor, and then says nothing to their spouse about any of it, that is someone who has already made a private calculation, someone who has looked at their situation with clear eyes and decided that a structural precaution is necessary. He was not acting, he was protecting. Those are different things. And here is a question worth sitting with. If he was that afraid, if he was afraid enough to secretly rewrite his will, why did he stay? We may never have a complete answer to that, but it is the question underneath everything else in this case. Now we come to the part of this story that matters most, the part that changes everything that follows. And this is where the disturbing details stop being background and become foreground. Between December of 2021 and February of 2022, while the Richins family was moving through what looked from the outside like a normal winter, Kouri made contact with a person known to law enforcement as a substance dealer. According to court documents, she asked this individual, referred to in legal filings as CL, whether they could provide pain medication for a real estate investor who was having back problems. She left cash at a renovation property. CL left hydrocodone there. In exchange, approximately 2 weeks later, she contacted this person again. This time she said she wanted something stronger. She used the phrase, "that Michael Jackson stuff." She said she was looking for fentanyl. Stop on that phrase for a moment. Michael Jackson did not die from fentanyl. That is not what the reference means. The reference means something powerful enough to kill, something that works, something with that kind of finality. She paid roughly $900. She received between 15 and 30 pills. Why buy fentanyl at all? That question does not have a comfortable answer. 3 days after that first purchase, it was Valentine's Day. Eric told his business partner Cody that Kouri had made him a sandwich that afternoon. After eating it, he said, he broke out in hives, felt like he could not breathe, and used one of his son's EpiPens. He took Benadryl. He passed out on the couch. He called Cody afterward. He said he believed Kouri was trying to kill him for the money. He said this clearly. He said it to a person who would later repeat it to investigators. Kouri's legal team has described that incident as minor, exaggerated by Eric's family. Her attorney pointed out that he coached his son's game later that evening, that he recovered. He did recover. That time, approximately 2 weeks after Valentine's Day, Kouri made a second fentanyl purchase from the same dealer, another $900, left for her in a fire pit at one of her properties in Midway. Why buy it twice? If the first purchase was truly for a back pain investor, why buy it again 2 weeks later, after an incident where your husband called his business partner and said you were trying to kill him? 13 days after that second purchase, Eric Richins was dead. But that is not the most important detail about those purchases. Here is what investigators would later establish. In January of 2022, the same month as the first fentanyl purchase, Eric's business partner, Kouri, received a notification from their insurance provider. Someone had logged into the account and made changes. The name that had been removed from Eric's life insurance policy was Kouri's. The name added as sole beneficiary was Kouri's. She had done this without telling either of them. Kouri contacted Eric immediately. They reversed the change. But this time, Eric did not simply adjust the paperwork and move on. He removed Kouri from the policy entirely. He named his sister Katie as power of attorney on the account. And he told his sisters directly, if anything ever happens to me, look at Kouri. He had now restructured his estate twice, in secret, both times pointing his protections away from his wife and toward his family. And he still did not leave. If you are watching this and trying to understand why a man who was that afraid stayed in that house, you are asking the right question. And the honest answer is that it is one of the most human and one of the most painful aspects of this entire case. People stay, even when they know, even when the signs are clear. They stay because of the children. They stay because the alternative feels impossible. They stay because some days nothing happens and they convince themselves the fear is outsized. Eric Richins stayed. He coached another sports game. He went to work. He tried to protect himself quietly from inside a house where, according to prosecutors, someone was already planning what came next. According to Kouri's account of their final evening together, she and Eric had been celebrating. She told investigators they were happy that night. They had just received confirmation that their offer on a large Midway estate, a property that had been a source of months of serious conflict between them, had been accepted. She said she went to the kitchen around 9 in the evening, made him a Moscow Mule, vodka with ginger beer and lime, and brought it to him in the bedroom along with a THC gummy. Shortly after, one of their sons woke up from a night terror. She went to comfort him and fell asleep in his room. Around 3 in the morning, she returned to the bedroom. She said she realized Eric's body was cold. He wasn't breathing. She called 911 and told the operator she had been attempting CPR. When paramedics arrived, Eric was found at the foot of the bed or on the floor near it, not in the position of someone sleeping peacefully, who was discovered by a partner lying down beside them. The paramedics noted something else. Eric had blood coming from his mouth. Sustained CPR leaves physical evidence of effort in the person performing it. Those signs were not clearly present. The dispatcher had instructed Kouri to move Eric from the bed to the floor, which accounts for the positioning. The absence of physical evidence consistent with actual effort is harder to explain away. Eric was pronounced dead, 39 years old. And here is something that does not fit the picture of celebration and sudden grief. The following day, Kouri hosted a gathering at their home. There was drinking, there was discussion of the Midway estate, the same property she cited as reason for celebration the night he died. According to people who were there, she was still focused on the closing. Less than 24 hours after finding her husband dead in their bedroom, why hold a gathering the day after? Why was the conversation still about the house? It was during that gathering and the confrontation that followed the next morning that Kouri discovered something she had not known. Eric's sister Katie had been named executor of his estate. The living trust he had drawn up in secret in November of 2020 protected everything, the home, the business, the personal property. None of it was Kouri's. Every calculation she may have made built on the prenuptial clause that said death meant everything had been made against an assumption that turned out to be false. Eric had seen it coming and quietly moved the board. The legal response was swift. Kouri filed a claim arguing Eric had fraudulently transferred assets that belonged to her under the prenup. She sought compensation. She sought legal fees from Katie directly. She was also, during this same window, beginning work on a children's book. The book was called Are You With Me? Kouri said she and her sons wrote it together to process their grief and help other families facing sudden loss. She described it as something that came from genuine emotional need. She promoted it publicly. She appeared on local television. She spoke about Eric's death, her son's confusion, the importance of finding meaning in loss. The book rose near the top of sales charts on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. There is a version of this that is generous. A mother in genuine pain, trying to give meaning to something devastating, trying to create something that might help other children. That interpretation is possible. But here is what was happening simultaneously. At the time Kouri was conducting that media tour, she was under active criminal investigation for her husband's murder. The drug purchase records had already been located. The deleted phone data was already being analyzed. The timeline of her activity on the night of Eric's death was already being reconstructed. She appeared on that television show approximately 3 weeks before her arrest. When the arrest became public, the hosts who had interviewed her watched the footage back. One of them noted that Kouri had contacted the station herself. She had reached out and asked to come on and promote her book. In May of 2023, Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with first-degree felony murder. Let's now walk through the prosecution's evidence categories, because understanding what they have and what they do not have is essential to following this trial with any real analytical clarity. The first category is the drug procurement timeline. Between December of 2021 and early March of 2022, Kouri made at least 2 documented purchases of fentanyl from a known dealer. The second purchase came approximately 2 weeks before Eric's death. The drug that killed him was street fentanyl, the same category of substance she had been acquiring. The second category is financial. A forensic expert testified that at the time of Eric's death, Kouri's accounts were overdrawn, her credit lines were at their limits, and she owed approximately $4 million to lenders who had financed her real estate projects. She had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Eric, some appearing to involve forged signatures. The expert's conclusion: Eric was worth significantly more to Kouri dead than alive. Under the prenuptial terms, divorce gave her nothing from his estate. His death, she believed, gave her everything. What she did not know was that Eric had already moved everything beyond her reach, which means the murder, if she committed it, produced almost none of the financial outcomes she appears to have been counting on. The third category is digital. Carrier records from Kouri's phone showed calls, movement, and deleted messages during the window she claimed to have been asleep in her son's room. That activity had been wiped from the device itself. Investigators estimated she may have waited as many as 15 minutes before placing the 911 call. What was she doing during those 15 minutes? And then there are the Google searches conducted in the hours and days following Eric's death, the lethal threshold for fentanyl, whether life insurance pays when a death certificate reads pending, luxury prisons for wealthy Americans, whether police can compel a lie detector test, how to permanently and remotely delete data from an iPhone. Each of those searches, taken individually, can be explained. But ask yourself this: if your husband just died of what you believe was an accidental overdose, what is the order of those searches? You search what fentanyl does. You search whether your insurance will pay. Fine. But when does how to permanently delete data from my iPhone enter your mind? When you already know what is on that phone. There is one piece of evidence in this case that deserves its own section because it is among the most analytically revealing things that has surfaced. Several months into her pre-trial detention, jail staff searched Kouri's cell and found a handwritten letter. The heading, in large letters: "Walk the dog." Below that, in smaller writing, "But take vague notes so you remember." The letter was addressed to her mother. In it, Kouri set out in explicit and scripted detail precisely what she wanted her brother to say when he testified in court. She provided specific language. She told him what narrative to adopt. She wrote that Eric had a long history of buying drugs, that he purchased substances from strangers on hunting trips, that he had always let Kouri take blame for his problems. She wrote that Eric's sisters had always been jealous of her, and she directed that witnesses be found to confirm this. She included specific, quotable lines for him to deliver. Why write instructions for a witness? If you are innocent, you do not need to write the testimony. The truth is already the truth. You just need someone to tell it. You write the testimony when what you need is a particular version of the truth, one that did not naturally occur. When prosecutors moved to enter the letter into evidence, Kouri offered her explanation. She said it was fiction, part of a jailhouse mystery thriller she was writing. A creative project, characters named Kouri and Eric, circumstances mirroring her own case precisely, instructions addressed to her real mother, but fiction, creative expression. The judge allowed most of the letter into evidence. In January of 2024, an autopsy update revealed something that had not been in the initial report. Eric's system contained not only fentanyl, but also quetiapine, a psychiatric medication prescribed primarily for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Eric had no prescription for it. Kouri did. The most prominent side effect of quetiapine is extreme sedation. The question this raises is one that has not been answered with certainty. Was the quetiapine in Eric's system incidental street fentanyl is sometimes cut with it, or did it serve a function? Was someone in that house using it to ensure he would not wake up when the fentanyl arrived? That is a question for the jury, but the fact that it must be asked at all speaks to how many layers this case contains. Then, in mid-2025, Kouri was hit with an entirely separate set of charges. 5 counts of mortgage fraud, 7 counts of money laundering, 5 counts of forgery, 7 counts of issuing bad checks. Prosecutors alleged she had altered records from Eric's masonry company to qualify for additional loans and then redirected that borrowed money to cover other debts rather than the mortgages it was meant for. Guilty or not of murder, that is a serious financial picture for a woman who maintained she had no meaningful money problems. Every financial action visible, in this case the insurance modification, the suspected forgeries, the business record alterations, the real estate leverage, points to someone who treated financial architecture as something to be actively reshaped in her favor, regardless of the rules governing how that reshaping was supposed to work. Now, let's be fair to the defense, because analytical clarity requires it. They successfully excluded 2 interrogations from trial. One was conducted during a traffic stop without Miranda rights being administered. The second occurred at Kouri's home without a lawyer present. Both were constitutional violations. The judge agreed. The prosecution goes to trial without any recorded interrogation footage, a meaningful loss. The defense has also argued the case was largely manufactured. They say the Richins family, well connected in Summit County, pressured a private investigation that built its homicide theory through coaxing rather than evidence. They allege that Eric's sister Katie had been compensating witnesses for favorable testimony. They pointed to a conflict Eric had with a hunting outfitter who allegedly had ties to organized crime, noting he had spent part of the night he died researching how long it would take to drive to where this man lived in Mexico. Whether any of that has real evidentiary weight remains to be seen in trial. What genuinely did change the picture was the recantation of a key prosecution witness. Robert, who had previously told investigators he supplied fentanyl to CL Kouri's alleged dealer, later said what he actually sold was oxycodone, not fentanyl, a different drug entirely. The defense called this devastating. They also alleged the prosecution had known about this reversal for months before disclosing it. The prosecution maintains their case extends well beyond CL and Robert. They have indicated the totality of evidence does not collapse with that single thread. The jury will have to decide how much weight that recantation actually carries. Jury selection for the trial of Kouri Richins took place in February of 2026. It took only a matter of hours, which is notable for a case of this profile. The trial officially began on the 23rd of that month. And now the full weight of this case falls to 12 people who will have to sit with all of it. The drug purchases, the insurance modification, the financial insolvency, the deleted phone data, the searches, the letter from jail, the book, the television appearance 3 weeks before the arrest, the quetiapine with no prescription, the mortgage fraud charges, the forged signatures, the 2 years of quiet, structural self-protection that Eric built around himself while living with a woman he apparently feared. When you lay it out in sequence, a pattern emerges that is very difficult to explain as coincidence. But a pattern is not proof. The prosecution knows this, the defense knows this, and the jury will have to grapple with the gap between what the evidence strongly implies and what it definitively establishes. Eric Richins, by all visible accounts, was the kind of person who showed up for his sons, for his business partner, for his community. People described him in specific terms. He coached the teams. He made people laugh. He checked in. He was present in the particular way that matters and that people notice when it is gone. In the final 2 years of his life, he appears to have known something was wrong. He told his sister from Greece. He quietly rewrote his estate. He removed his wife from his insurance. He told Kouri after Valentine's Day, "I think she is trying to kill me for the money." He knew. He told people. He took structural action. He just did not leave. There is no clean explanation for that. People rarely leave even when the signals are clear. They stay for the children. They stay because the unthinkable is still unthinkable until it becomes undeniable. They stay because on most days, nothing catastrophic happens, and ordinary life fills in the space where the fear would otherwise live. Whatever kept Eric in that house, it cost him everything. And his 3 sons, boys who had a father who coached their teams and showed up and was by all accounts exactly who they needed him to be, are now navigating a world without him. Without either parent, depending on what this jury decides. That is not drama. That is not abstraction. That is the weight underneath all of this evidence, underneath all the financial analysis and phone data and legal filings. 3 children who needed both of their parents and will have neither. The most important analytical question in this case is not whether Kouri Richins killed her husband. It is what kind of thinking produces this specific pattern of behavior. Because everything visible here, the financial restructuring, the insurance modifications, the drug purchases, the phone deletions, the letter from jail, the book, the media appearances, the mortgage fraud, the witness scripting, none of it looks like the behavior of someone who panicked. It looks like the behavior of someone who believed consistently and over an extended period that they could engineer their environment precisely enough to stay ahead of consequences. Someone who purchased fentanyl and assumed the transaction was invisible. Someone who deleted messages and assumed the data was gone. Someone who scripted a witness's testimony from a jail cell and assumed it would read as fiction. Someone who appeared on local television as a grieving widow 3 weeks before her arrest and assumed the performance would hold. Why appear on television at all? Why write the book? Why keep managing the narrative so aggressively, across so many fronts, for so long? Those are not questions that point toward innocence. They are questions that point towards someone who understood exactly what they had done and believed they were still smart enough to outmaneuver it. The jury in Summit County, Utah, is now deciding whether the evidence is sufficient to prove what the pattern so strongly implies. The most important questions in this case were not always legal ones. They were asked quietly by a man who restructured his estate in secret because he did not know what else to do, who told the people he trusted most exactly what he feared, who stayed anyway. What the evidence now suggests is that someone in that house understood exactly how to use that loyalty against him. And 3 children somewhere in Utah are still waiting to find out whether the system will deliver the answer their father never got. Before we close this case study, there is one final question worth sitting with. Because the most disturbing cases are not always the ones where the evidence is unclear. Sometimes the most disturbing ones are the cases where the pattern looks almost obvious, but the law still requires proof beyond doubt. In the weeks leading up to Eric Richens' death, there were warnings. There were financial pressures. There were drug purchases. There were quiet decisions made by a man who appeared to understand that something around him had shifted. And yet none of those pieces, on their own, automatically prove intent. That responsibility now belongs to 12 jurors in Summit County. Their decision will determine whether this story becomes a confirmed murder or a pattern that was never legally proven. And that is where we turn the question to you. When you look at the full sequence of events, the fentanyl purchases, the insurance changes, the financial pressure, the deleted phone data, what do you think the pattern actually shows? Coincidence? Or planning? Let us know your analysis in the comments. If there are other cases you would like us to break down using this same analytical approach, you can suggest them there as well. And if you find these long-form case studies valuable, subscribing helps the channel continue investigating stories like this one. Now, we will continue following the trial as it develops. And when the next major development arrives, we will return to this case. Because for now, the answer still sits with the jury. Unresolved, a case study. This script covers events and evidence documented through early 2026. The trial of Kouri Richins is ongoing at time of writing.